man. It's great to meet you. I'm looking forward to getting into the story. I'm very excited. So thank you for taking a minute out today.
And Joe, thank you for having me on your show. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's begin our journey with with this. The 5 years ago, this pandemic did a lot to change and rearrange things. How much of living through that affected the way that you live life today?
Well, first off, I've been a hospice chaplain now for going into my 23rd year. So when the pandemic hit, the city of Everett, Washington was the first recorded case in the state, in the United States. And I live not even a mile away from the very hospital there at Providence in downtown Everett. So right from day one, when the COVID pandemic hit the United States, I was actively involved. I was down there doing bedside services and watched three people that completely passed away and saw so many more that were very, very sick. I myself did contract COVID, and fortunately, I had taken an inoculation that was similar to what they're using today, Joe. And I had it, but it was pretty mild. But over the course of about 16 or 17 months during its peak, it was very, very tragic. And as you know, I'm an author. I've written 12 books, working on a motion picture series. So every bit of the stuff involving the creation of the motion picture of my life was shut down at that time and stayed shut down for about a year and a half. It was really hard getting back online. So yeah, I was impacted.
So to get a handle on what you're doing right now, if I put you in front of a bunch of 12-year-olds at career day and one of the kids is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
Well, what I do is I'm a senior pastor of the Full Gospel Pentecostal Federated Church Association based in Seattle, Washington. I'm a seminary post-grad with a doctorate in Christian pastoral counseling. Completed my dissertation in 2004, receiving my doctorate that year. I work in the homeless community. I work in trap houses. I work in homeless camps. I deal primarily with rape victims, overdose cases, people that are brought to my residence because I live right downtown in the town that I'm living in. So I've been very, very actively involved for this will be my 21st year in the homeless community working. And the reason, Joe, that people come to my house is they know that I'm not going to call the police if it's an overdose case. If it's a rape case, I leave that decision up to the person that was deposited on my, doorsteps. And my primary function in life is to serve as Christ served us. And this is the transition that I've been since my the receiving of Jesus, which is October 19th, 1994 at 3:30 in the afternoon, in a holding cell on my way into federal prison to start an 8-year prison sentence.
So let's start peeling back the layers of this unbelievable story and ask you this. When you were in that seat in grade school, what was your dream job? What was the gig that you wanted to have in your life?
Oh, that's easy. My father owned a major construction company when I was a child growing up. He was also an assistant scoutmaster, so I came up through Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, and my dream was always to enter my father's company and at some point, hopefully, take over the business in later years.
So take me back to your childhood. Where were you born and raised? How did this story begin? What were the seeds that were sown?
That's an excellent question. And one thing I'd like to say to the audience right now, Joe, is my entire life is fully documented. So the story that all of you are about to hear is easily verifiable. We have kept everything from my childhood years all the way through my cartel years, military, everything. It's all there. So I'd like to say I was born in Seattle, Washington, October 24th, 1954. We relocated to Marysville, Washington, which is about 30 miles north of Seattle, where I grew up. My father's construction company was in the town next to us in Everett, Washington, and he was the owner and creator of Bradley Construction Company, named after our family. I grew up in a very normal lifestyle, very normal neighborhood, very normal friendships. In my neighborhood back in the 50s and 60s, people didn't lock their front doors. They left their keys in the ignitions of their cars. We could stay out until it got totally dark, playing in the streets and never had any fear or worry of anything happening to us. It was very, very uh, applicable to the style of life that came right after World War II. We're talking the late 1950s into the 60s. But what happened, Joe, that transformed my life was in 1969. I was at my high school, and me and two other kids decided to experiment and smoke a cigarette, and we got caught. And back in the 60s, when you got caught doing something like that, they considered that heinous. So they removed you for a half a year, an entire semester. Well, my mother and father had divorced. My mother was raising myself, my two younger siblings. My older brother was in Quezon, Vietnam, in the United States Marine Corps. And my mom decided she wasn't going to let me wander the streets while she had to go work every day. But she had a friend, Joe, that owned the Anaconda de Mexico Mining Corporation in the state of Durango in Mexico. And this was by a little village called Walterio of about 200 people. It was on the Zacatecas Durango border and very, very remote and extremely primitive. I mean, these are adobe houses. The people wore peasant clothing. Mode of transportation was burros, things to this nature. So anyway, my mom's friend came up to Seattle, and we had a sit down that night, and they decided to send me to Mexico for like a year, year and a half, however long they deemed necessary for me to experience, if you will, another foreign country, another culture. I was a 15-year-old kid and primed for it. So we flew down to Mazatlan, Sinaloa, Mexico, and a couple guys from the mining camp drove down into the state of Sinaloa and picked us up and took us back up through the old road into the state of Durango up to the camp. And Ted stayed with me for 4 or 5 days, and then he flew back stateside. So I was totally alone. Now, bear in mind, I've never even heard Spanish spoken before. I'm in a village of about 200, maybe 250 people maximum, and not one of them spoke English. But there was a bodyguard that was brought into the mining corporation specifically to protect me while I was in country. And he did speak English. And his name was Memo. May he rest in peace. Memo was a member of a very large mafia family, an organized crime syndicate. And this was unbeknownst to me. And the Anaconda Mining Corporation back in those years was primarily a front. The crime family that owned that area, a name I'm not going to mention on your show, he had a son about my age, and his son and I, boy, we clicked right away. We were like best friends, and I had a burro that was named Pepito, and that was my mode of transportation to go from the mining camp down to the village, to Walterio. Well, as the months started unrolling, Joe, what I would do is I'd jump on my burro and I would ride the canyon trails, and I would come across these massive fields of flowers, and they were poppies. And it was the opium growing production for manufacturing heroin. And then the Chowari Indians that lived in the mountains there in that region would come down on the trail. And at first, everybody was real suspicious about this blonde haired, blue eyed kid out there riding their trails. But ultimately, over a period of time, people warmed up to me. And I was invited into the Chowari village. And at night, they would sit around with these big, cool fires, and they would take the husk of a corn and they would fill it full of marijuana, and they'd make the biggest joints you ever saw, kind of like the Cheech and Chong joints on that album cover.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they would sit around and ceremoniously pass this thing around until everybody was completely obliterated. And I can remember thinking that I was hoping to God I wasn't going to be sacrificed or something because I'd never been, yeah, never been exposed to something like that.
Yeah.
But again, the months go by, I really acclimated into it. And during this time, I'm learning how to speak Spanish, and I'm getting real familiar with their cultures. And my first experience of death, an actual execution, was I was about 15 and a half. And we were in the eating area of the mining camp. And I'm sitting there with my compadre, Memo, my bodyguard. And this guy walks in through the front of the eating area to the table that was right next to me, pulls a gun out and blew this guy's brains out, not 5 feet away from me. Now, bear in mind, I'm 15 and a half years old now. The worst I've ever seen is a fist fight at a Friday night keg party, that kind of stuff. So I'd never witnessed death or violence of that nature. And I remember Memo took the guy out of there, talked to him for a few minutes, and then Memo came back in and grabbed me and took me out. And he said, "Listen, I want to tell you something. Whatever you see down here, whatever you hear down here, whatever you observe, don't ever take it to the United States. Don't ever tell anybody because you're now in a different culture. You're in a different country. Things are handled in a different way." And up until 5 years ago, when I was in the middle of writing some of my books, I never mentioned it my entire life. And as you know, I turned 71 years old today. So, yeah, that was my first exposure of many executions to come in the years ahead of me. Well, I got word my brother John had been wounded in action in Quezon at the Battle of Quezon in Vietnam, and he was heading stateside. So I got back up to the States, went to the Bremerton Hospital, and I saw my brother in this ward laying in a bed. And all these young people, like 19, 20-year-old soldiers, brave souls, every one of them, were all laying there with various combat related injuries to their bodies. And I became really angry, Joe. I was so angry seeing my brother wounded combat in action like that. And I decided I wanted to go in the army and I wanted to serve and I wanted to go over there and I wanted to wound a couple of them. So at 16 years of age, I entered into the community college, got my GED, and 2 weeks after I was 17 years old, I was in Fort Knox, Kentucky at basic training. Graduated basic, then I went to Tigerland in Fort Polk, Louisiana. Now, this is February to April of 1972, and I'm in Tigerland. And at that time, they made a movie called Tigerland.
Yeah.
And that movie was made from February to April of 72. And I happened to be one of the soldiers that did cycle through Tigerland at that time. And it was extensive training. They were bringing Green Berets out of Vietnam that had just stepped right out of the jungle a couple weeks before we met them. And the training was so intense that after our cycle, Congress stepped in and they canceled that type of training permanently. Tigerland exists today, but the type of training we went through no longer existed. But I did my prisoner of war camp training there. I did my jungle survival school training there, special weapons training. It was advanced infantry training school, but it had a different flair to it because Vietnam was wide open at the time. They were learning so many ways to train to prepare people for it, and this was literally shock therapy. And so anyway, I graduated that, and then I went to airborne school from there. And now I'm 17 and a half years old, and I'm jumping out of airplanes while my friends are in the 11th grade. I get my silver wings on my chest while I'm still 17 years of age, and then went home for a leave, and then I was shipped off to Europe. I was in Germany for 19 months. Got injured on a parachute fall, returned back to the United States, and ETS'd out of the Army March 14th of 1974. When I left the VA hospital, I went up to Sacramento. My family had relocated to California during our years away, and I entered college there under the GI Bill. Well, winter came and a school break came, and I thought I'd go down to the Vigies and pay respects to my family down there and the people that I had spent part of my childhood with and really loved very much. And they always told me, they said, aquí en su corazón vive la sangre de la ciudad. In your heart pumps the blood of this village. So return to your village one day. So I did that. And I go down there. And by this time, my compadre, Ruben, who is my age, we're now 20, 21 years old. And he is a ranking official in now what's being turned into a cartel from a criminal organization family. We all know the story about Angel Gallardo, Felix Gallardo, who created the cartels across Mexico. He was based in Guadalajara, Jalisco. And that's when I first met El Chapo. Chapo and I started smuggling marijuana into the United States. They had me bring vehicles down. They cut in compartments. And back in early 1970s, we didn't have the border restrictions that we see today, Joe. So it was pretty easy. And I spent, over 5 years crossing that border, running loads back and forth until 79, when a time came for me to start getting into the cocaine industry, which they initiated. But by then, Chapo was still in Guadalajara. He hadn't started forming the Sinaloa drug cartel yet, but it was under formation. He just wasn't the leader at that time. And then my friend Rafael Carta Quintero was the one that created Sensimilia, the seedless marijuana, and was the one that built the largest marijuana plant, literally thousands of hectares out in the middle of the Chihuahua Desert. And you could see it from space. It was so large. But Kiki Camarena, special agent for the DEA, was stationed in the 1980s in Guadalajara. He was the one that uncovered it. And Rafael Quintero had him kidnapped, and they tortured and executed Special Agent Camarena. In my later years as an undercover operative for the Department of Justice, I did meet with one of the DEA agents up in Tijuana, Mexico, that was actually assigned at that office at that time. So I had a whole different slant, but I was actually in Mexico at the time loading cars when word came out that Kiki Camarena had been executed. So I immediately got out of Mexico, and for the next 8 months, it was chaos down there for the Jalisco cartel and now the Sinaloa cartel. They were all getting hit because of killing a DEA agent. And DEA, with great respect, I worked with them 17 years of my life undercover, just one of several agencies I worked with. But they have it in their heart real big. If you hurt one of them, we will come at you with the full force of the United States government. And that's what they did. And as a result of that, it forever altered the stability of the cartels. Of course, they owned everybody from the president down in those years and dumped millions and millions of dollars for protection. But what they did was they pissed off a northern ally. And when cross, you cross with the government as strong and as powerful as the United States at that time, the investigations started climbing up that ladder slowly, and they started picking off politicians. They started picking off, you know, uh, police commanders, military leaders, things to this nature started falling by the side. So the cartels had to restructure the way that they processed intelligence gathering resources, transshipments of narcotics into not only the United States, but we're now opening up into the European corridor. They were opening up in like Australia. And as you know, I'm an author. I've written 12 books. 11 of these books are action adventure novels that are based on the stories of a lot of agency personnel, special ops teams. I would be meeting in the cafeterias down at the various embassies as I started operations in a multitude of foreign countries. And over the 17 years undercover, I was able to amass so much material that that's why we're doing a motion picture based on my true life story and looking at the TV series. But I want to back up a little bit. I'd like to get back down to October 19th of 1994 when I converted my life. I had walked in 1993 of my own free will as the largest kingpin operating for the Sinaloa drug cartel in Pacific Northwest history. I was moving a quarter to a third of a ton of cocaine at a time up there, and primary markets were from Seattle north all the way into Alaska. But Vancouver, Canada was probably a principal drop site for me, averaging a few hundred kilos a month easily. And these people that I was operating with up there knew that I was Sinaloa backed by the Sinaloa drug cartel. So whenever I had a situation of a large amount of money, and we're talking in millions, not a few hundred grand, but any situation or another organization coming into that area, I simply had to make a call to Culiacan, Sinaloa, Mexico, and 4 or 5 days later, my problems were eradicated and I could continue doing the development that I was doing. You're talking about an extremely sophisticated organization. This is the 1980s now. In 1979 is when cocaine started landing through the Mexican corridor instead of the Caribbean routes into Miami and all of that. Carlos Joy Later, was the one that initiated for the Medellin drug cartel airplane transport, and he built airstrips out in the Cays, and then he had drop sites in southern Florida that would be developed through Griselda, who was the chief cocaine trafficker for the Medellin drug cartel in my years during my time in the business. But uh, the day I walked in, it was in I believe, no, it wasn't that late. It was summertime of 1993. I knew I had heat on me. I flew to Culiacan, sat down at the table of bosses and said, look, guys, I've got some federal heat on me. I had a lieutenant on the Seattle Narcotics Police Department force who was on my payroll. So I had intel coming in because when the feds are operational in certain backyards, they will bring in local law enforcement or agencies for further intelligence gathering as they're creating their sources. My case was dubbed Operation Northern Exposure. It was a multi-agency task force formed by the federal government, specifically Department of Justice, to take down the largest cocaine trafficker with ties to Pablo Escobar, and that was me. I was the primary target. So you can imagine how they felt, Joe, when I walked into the U.S. Attorney's office and I come in there with one of the most famous attorneys in this part of the world beside me. And I says, I'm Hal Bradley, and I'm here to have a discussion. What happened was when I negotiated for my freedom in Culiacan, I was given hugs and handshakes. Everything was set. And I got back to my home a day and a half later and found 350 kilos of cocaine sitting in a white van with two soldiers in my driveway where my wife lived, where my child lived. And because I was an underboss, I had the ability, if you will, to turn to them and say, look, we got federal heat, get that load the hell out of here, and I'll deal with down south later. And that's what I did. I didn't surrender the load. I didn't take them out. I got them out of there because I really needed a night to think about my approach to this. Because let me tell you something, Joe, when you decide to take on a drug cartel, you better god dang well have a bigger baseball bat than what they're going to swing at you because you're dead. But before you die, and I have witnessed this multiple times, they will kill the people that you love the most, and they'll take a day or two to kill them. I've seen everything from people gas dumped on, lit on fire. I've watched three Rottweilers eat a man alive one time with my best friend flew down there with me just to negotiate another 600 kilos of cocaine we needed on a deal. And they set examples by violence where before Medellin became involved in the in central Mexico, excuse me, it used to be just take a guy out, put a bullet in his head, boom, that's, end of story. But the CIA taught people how to torture from Central America, and that torture tactics filtered down into Colombia. And Pablo Escobar had people who became experts at torture and experts of instruction of torture. So these people came up and educated the drug cartels that were now cemented in Mexico and formed. And everything changed. It was so horrific. I mean, as I talk to you now, and as God is my witness on this story, I still remember so many horrific examples that I saw. I can remember being out on ranches and being in the house talking to the hefe of the ranch and look down a corridor in there and I'd see the faces of young children peeking out of a door. And I've seen this multiple times, and these are children that are being trafficked to the United States. And there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. I was down there on a narcotics deal. I've never been in the human trafficking business. I could never be in the human trafficking business. But what the hell is a couple thousand kilos of marijuana going to hurt? What's a few kilos of cocaine going to hurt? And that was my attitude. And that's what I was caught up in at that time of my life. But I told you in the beginning how I grew up. My mother was a den mother. I was a Cub Scout. My father was assistant scoutmaster. I grew up in a really great foundation. I grew up with morals and with decency and knowing right from wrong. And I think that what triggered that was when I went back down in 1974 and I was able to sit with my friend Ruben. And now he's like a lieutenant in a drug cartel family. He became very powerful. And growing up at Chapo and around Chapo and Rafael Cara Quintero, and where I watched these guys, one time they were barely above peasant status. And now when I would go down to visit in later years as I developed, I'm walking into palaces and mansions, and everybody's got AK-47s, and all the women in the world are running around naked and having a great time. And there's kilos of cocaine opened up on every table. And that really was like that. It was just amazing. And what happened was we all got exposed to extreme amounts of money from being poor. And we didn't understand how to manipulate or maneuver. But this is where Chapo came into play. Chapo was an organizer. And Chapo knew how to put the right people in the right places. He learned how to filter and transfer money into other assets that would be less likely to be taken off or discovered. Shell corporations, the right politicians down in Mexico City, everything that he created. And then Felix Gallardo, who is known as the godfather of all godfathers at that time, he was the one that took Chapo's foundation of creating and really expanded it. He brought all of them together, all of them, like the Cielo de los Cielos. I can't remember his name anymore. Mayo up there in Juarez, and Mayo opened up the corridors, and he and Chapo moved 70,000 kilos of cocaine in one deal. I mean, this is how, yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I guess if you watch that show Narcos, you can see it. And I've watched it multiple times because I lived my life down there during those years. And Joe, they were very, very accurate. I mean, whoever they got to do some of the screenplay writing and script writing was definitely had somebody who was connected to the life that we were all living during those years. And I really, really admire the work as a result because it doesn't glorify being a criminal. It merely transfers the activities of history.
Yeah.
And that's where I at. But now, oh, do you have a question?
Oh, no, no, no.
Okay.
My question when I hear all of this is, how have you been able to put all of this trauma into perspective? Was it becoming a born again Christian and finding your place and helping people through hospice? How is that? How have you dealt with that?
Man, that is an amazing question. In 1994, when I entered into the federal prison system, I was sent to an FCI in Colorado. And while I was there, something started happening to my body. It was shutting down. I got very ill. They did blood work, found that my liver was shutting down. So they flew me to Springfield, Illinois, and put me in the medical center for federal prisoners there. And that's where I met John Gotti. Gotti was there when I was there. And um, uh, so many famous people, so many like Italian mafia guys that were higher level because everybody that was in prison doing their life sentences wanted to get to these medical facilities because it was a coast in your time. But while I was there, I volunteered for an experimental drug. They figured I had about 3 months of life left. I was terminal and I was rapidly declining. So I said, what the hell, I'll volunteer for it. And I started taking injections twice a week, and 10 months later, I was cured. And here I am 30 some odd years later.
Wow.
So, yeah, yeah. And, but what was interesting, and this is the journey of God, I had already received Jesus. I was already in Bible study, and I got offered an opportunity to become a hospice counselor to help assist fellow dying prisoners going through the dying process. And only 11 of us got offered that. So I took it, I jumped on it, got trained, and became certified. And then I started my seminarial years to get my seminarial degrees behind me to where I could start formulating my future, which was to become ultimately a pastor of a community. And ultimately, I did achieve that. But at that time, uh, my seminary room, instead of going to an academy, was sitting in the death rooms. And in my Bible, I have all 24 names, time of death, and cause of death listed in there. And as I was cramming and doing my studies, and at that time I was under Assemblies of God pastorship, the guy would come in and course instruct us. 24 men died in my presence as I was with them in federal prison, and I would be the only one with them. So I started writing articles for Hospice Magazine. I was interviewed in newspapers, radios. I was on TV. I was on all these different media platforms. Excuse me. And I have all of that documented and secured. I kept every because I knew the story at this point was getting absolutely remarkable to go from some high level guy that was with the Sinaloa drug cartel to becoming a minister aiding and assisting prisoners through the dying process. It was just phenomenal. And a time came where I was completely healed, and I had been for a while. I had 2.5 years of seminary completed. I was formally ordained while in federal prison, and then later reordained in Seattle, Washington, under Bishop Simi D. LaFall. But I got transferred to Leavenworth. So here I am up in Leavenworth. And right away, I get plugged into the education department. I'm helping guys get their GEDs. Uh, but the hospice thing, what it had transformed inside of me, I brought it to the attention of the coordinators that ran the education department. They brought in some representatives from Hospice of Leavenworth into the prison. And for the next year, I set up these, they were, I believe, 10-week long courses, and we started training people to how to become humanitarians
Wow.
and to care for other. Yeah, it was amazing,
Yeah.
and it was so good. Can't remember the name of the warden right now. Old age setting in, but anyway, he actually came down to the education department and said, "This is absolutely fantastic. We're getting to see people not only rehabilitate, but we're seeing humanitarian compassion." And with Hospice of Leavenworth, when they would come into the prison and we would do our course instructions to the inmates there, they would bring dying patients in. So the students had an opportunity to sit there bedside and talk to a dying person, and what they're translating their life through to these people, further giving them more and more compassion for another human being. And this was very exciting to me. I was so glad to see it. And this is insane. My last day in federal prison at Leavenworth, I was out on the yard with a lifelong friend of mine that I ran into there while I was in prison. And he says, "Hey, come on with me, man." And he takes me into the corridor, and we go down to the basement, and he flips a switch, and there was probably maybe 200 people there. A lot of them were inmates. A lot of them were the hospice people from Leavenworth came in. The warden was there, Warden Booker. And a lot of the course instructors in the education department, several guards, and they all wanted to say goodbye to Pastor Hal. So they threw me a private going away party at Leavenworth.
That's
At
cool.
11. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy.